The sun was melting into the horizon, painting Kadora city in shades of gold. Jibril slipped into his dented silver sedan, phone in hand, ready to call a client. He didn't even start the engine before the car's speakers came alive with a sudden crackle. His phone had somehow connected to a Bluetooth device, not his own, but Zara's car, parked 3 streets away. At first, all he heard was soft laughter, the kind that used to warm him. But then another voice joined in, low and familiar. It was Kamau. His best friend. The man who had stood beside him at his wedding, who knew every secret Jibril ever told. Jibril froze, his breath catching. Kamau's voice sharpened into a whisper, carrying words that sliced through the evening air, the perfect way to finish him off, and he'll never see it coming. Jibril's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Zara's laughter shifted, no longer warm but cold, cruel. Together, they spoke about tomorrow night. How his bank accounts would vanish, his business would be theirs, and a scandal would destroy his name forever. Their voices danced between mockery and glee, like villains rehearsing their final scene. Jibril sat there, staring at nothing, the city lights beginning to blur in his eyes. The people he trusted most were not just betraying him, they were plotting to erase him. And in that moment, under the golden sky, Jibril knew the game had already begun. But it wouldn't end the way they thought. Jibril didn't move. His whole body felt locked in place, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight it hurt. The laughter in his ears was still going, but now Zara's voice had changed. It was no longer soft and loving, it had turned sharp, almost cutting. There was a tone in it he had never heard before, something cold and sure. Then Kamau spoke again, his words slow and deliberate, as if each one was a step in a plan already set in motion. Tomorrow night, he said, that's when we finish it. The accounts will be empty by morning. The business will be ours. And the scandal, oh, it will make sure he can never recover. Zara giggled at that, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Jibril could hear glasses clinking, the sound of wine being poured. They were celebrating. Celebrating his destruction. Kamau's deep chuckle rolled through the car speakers like a drumbeat, followed by Zara's smooth, mocking reply. By the time he realizes what happened, we'll be so far ahead he won't even have a chance to fight back. They talked about fake documents they had already signed, secret meetings with people who used to be Jibril's partners, and how they had planted rumors about him in places that mattered most. Every word hit him like a blow, but he stayed perfectly still, not even daring to breathe too loud. It felt unreal, like he was listening to a movie villain explain the plot before the final act. Except this wasn't a movie, this was his life. And the two people he trusted more than anyone were talking about tearing it apart, piece by piece, with no mercy. Zara's voice softened again, almost playfully. When he's ruined, when he's begging for help, we'll just walk away. Let him see what it's like to lose everything. Kamau laughed again, deep and cruel. And the best part, he added, is he'll never know it was us. At least, not until it's too late. Jibril felt something stir inside him then, something dark and steady. The shock was still there, but it was no longer the only thing he felt. Beneath it, a slow burn was starting. He let them talk, let them lay out every step of their plan. Every sentence was another thread in the web they were spinning around him, but he was already thinking about how to break it apart. He could picture them in Zara's car, her leaning back with that sly smile, Kamau leaning in close, both of them so sure they had already won. They had no idea their words were flowing straight to him. They had no idea he was listening, storing each detail away like ammunition. When the laughter finally faded and the connection went silent, Jibril stayed in the driver's seat, staring ahead at the empty street. His hands were still tight on the wheel, but now his grip wasn't from fear, it was from control. He wasn't going to confront them now. Not yet. Tomorrow night might have been their plan, but he had just started making his own. And his plan was going to hurt them more than they could ever imagine. That night, Jibril sat alone in his living room with the lights off. The only glow came from his phone on the table, the screen lighting up each time he pressed play. Over and over, the voices filled the silence. Zara's sweet tone turning cruel. Kamau's deep voice whispering betrayal. Every time he listened, the words cut deeper. He had built a life with this woman, trusted her with his dreams, his secrets, his heart. He had stood by Kamau through years of friendship, shared food, laughter, even tears. And now those same people were plotting not just to betray him, but to erase him completely. They weren't just stealing money or business. They were planning to destroy his name, his reputation, his future. Jibril leaned back in his chair, staring into the dark. He could feel the heat building inside him, but it wasn't the kind of anger that made him shout or break things. This was different. This was quiet, sharp, controlled. His face stayed calm, but deep down, something was shifting. He realized that if they wanted to play this game, he wouldn't just defend himself, he would decide how it ended. He picked up the phone again and replayed the recording, this time focusing on every detail. The clink of their glasses. The way Zara's voice rose when she laughed. The pause before Kamau spoke about the scandal. These little things were more than sounds, they were evidence. He imagined them sitting there, so sure of themselves, so sure he was clueless. It made him almost smile. In his mind, he started building a plan. Not the kind of rushed reaction that would give them a chance to spin lies and escape. No, this had to be precise, like a chess game where every move had been thought through. They would never see it coming. They would think they were still in control until the very last moment, when everything they had built on lies would collapse in front of them. Jibril poured himself a glass of water and sat back down. He could still hear their laughter echoing in his head. He thought about every good moment he had shared with them, and how all of it had been poisoned by this one night. But instead of drowning in the pain, he began to feel something else, focus. He knew what had to be done. He would watch them closely without them knowing. He would gather everything, messages, documents, meetings. He would make sure that when he struck, there would be no escape, no denial, no way for them to twist the truth. The more he thought about it, the calmer he became. They believed they were writing the story of his downfall. But they didn't know that he had just taken the pen from their hands. In the quiet of that dark room, with only his phone glowing on the table, Jibril decided that the final move would be his. And when it came, it would be so perfect, so complete, that neither Zara nor Kamau would ever recover. They had chosen this game. Now they would have to play by his rules. The next morning, Jibril stepped out of his house dressed neatly, face calm, and heart steady. To anyone watching, he looked like a man without a worry in the world. At the cafe, he greeted Kamau with the same warmth as always, pulling him into a brotherly hug. In the evening, when he got home, he kissed Zara's cheek, asking how her day was, even joking about their future travel plans. His voice was smooth, his smile was natural, and not once did he let them see the storm brewing behind his eyes. They believed he was still blind. That was exactly what he wanted. But while they laughed with him, Jibril was already moving in silence. The first thing he did was secure his money. One by one, he shifted his accounts, closed joint ones, and moved the funds somewhere they couldn't touch. Every transaction was done quietly, without leaving any hint they would notice. At night, when the house was dark, he sat at his desk going through old emails, business records, and private messages. His fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up files and tracking names he hadn't thought about in years. And then the truth began to appear. Fake documents, contracts with his forged signature, papers showing he had agreed to sell his own shares. There were bank statements from accounts he never opened, all in Dera, a city far from Kadora, under names linked to Zara and Kamau. He stared at them, his jaw tightening, realizing they had been preparing this for months, maybe even years. The worst was the photos. He found them tucked away in a hidden folder, the kind most people would never find. Pictures of Zara and Kamau together in different cities, holding hands, laughing, drinking in restaurants they swore they'd never visited. There they were, smiling in a beach resort on the same weekend Zara had told him she was visiting her parents. Another showed Kamau in a suit at a meeting he claimed never happened, Zara right beside him, their faces lit with the kind of joy people couldn't fake. Each discovery cut deeper than the last, but Jibril didn't let anger control him. Instead, every piece of evidence became a weapon. He saved them in hidden drives, backed them up in secure places, making sure that even if they tried to erase it, the truth would survive. His plan was no longer just about stopping them, it was about exposing them so completely that no one would ever trust them again. In public, he stayed the same. He spoke kindly, smiled often, even shared drinks with Kamau as if nothing was wrong. But behind that calm mask, he was laying the foundation for their downfall. They thought they were clever, that their lies were buried deep. They had no idea that Jibril was already 10 steps ahead, quietly pulling every secret out of the shadows. And as the days passed, he began to feel a strange sense of control. They were moving toward the day they thought they would win. But only he knew that the real ending would belong to him. Jibril knew this moment had to be perfect. Every move, every word, had to be placed like a blade in exactly the right spot. He spent the week preparing, checking and rechecking his plan until there was no chance of failure. One evening, while Zara was making dinner, he leaned casually against the counter and told her he'd been invited to Goma for a big business pitch. He spoke with excitement, even tossing in details about the hotel he'd booked, and the meeting schedule he'd confirmed. She smiled in all the right places, but he saw the flicker in her eyes, the silent calculation. She believed him, and he knew exactly where she would go the moment he was gone. The next night, instead of heading to an airport, Jibril parked a rented white van in the shadows across from Kamau's luxury penthouse. The back of the van was already set up, cameras with long lenses, tiny wireless microphones, and a laptop to monitor everything in real time. He sat in the darkness, headphones on, his eyes fixed on the lit windows above. Just as he expected, less than an hour later, Zara's car pulled up. She walked in like she belonged there. From his vantage point, Jibril watched them embrace, her coat falling to the floor as Kamau poured 2 glasses of wine. The microphones picked up every clink of glass, every burst of laughter. They spoke freely, their voices dripping with pride, calling him the fool who had handed them everything. Jibril stayed perfectly still, listening as they went over the final steps of their plan, confident they were untouchable. They joked about how he'd be in Goma, begging investors, while they celebrated their victory here. Kamau leaned back on the couch, laughing loud and careless, while Zara rested her head on his shoulder, smiling like she'd already won. The cameras caught every angle. The wine glasses, the papers spread across the coffee table, even the way they looked at each other when they thought no one could see. The microphones captured every poisonous word, how they'd transfer the last of the money tomorrow, how they'd tell everyone Jibril had abandoned the business, how no one would believe his side of the story. But now, Jibril didn't just have suspicions, he had proof. Proof sharp enough to slice through their lies in front of anyone who mattered. Proof that no denial, no act, no fake tears could erase. Hours later, when Zara finally left the penthouse, Jibril didn't rush home. He stayed in the van, watching her drive away, replaying the recordings again and again. Every laugh, every smirk, every careless confession was locked in his files now. They thought they had beaten him. They thought he was far away, clueless and defeated. But in reality, he was sitting just across the street, holding the keys to their destruction in his hands. And as he closed the laptop and started the van, Jibril felt no anger, only a cold, steady satisfaction. The trap was set. All that was left now was to spring it. 2 days later, the grand ballroom of Katora's most luxurious hotel was filled with the city's wealthiest investors, politicians, and business leaders. The chandeliers glowed above the crowd, glasses clinked, and polite laughter floated through the air. Jibril moved through the room with quiet confidence, shaking hands, greeting people, as if nothing in the world was wrong. When it was time for speeches, the host introduced him, and he stepped onto the stage with a warm smile. "Before we begin," he said into the microphone, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made people pay attention, "I have a special presentation to share with all of you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He didn't look at Zara, who stood at the side of the room in an elegant dress, or at Kamau, who leaned casually against a pillar, flashing his usual charming smile. The lights dimmed, and the giant screen behind Jibril flickered to life. At first, the audience saw nothing but a black background. Then came the voices. Zara's laughter. Kamau's deep chuckle. The audio was crystal clear, echoing across the silent ballroom. "Tomorrow night, that's when we finish it," Kamau's voice boomed. "The accounts will be empty. The business will be ours." Laughter followed. Zara's voice purred, "And the scandal will ruin him for good." The room froze. Gasps burst from the crowd. Faces turned toward Zara and Kamau, some in shock, others in disgust. On the screen, hidden camera footage appeared, Zara in Kamau's arms, wine glasses in hand, smiling as they planned Jibril's downfall. Their words played over and over, each confession louder than the last. Zara's smile collapsed, her face draining of color. Kamau's confident posture stiffened, his eyes darting to the exits. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Jibril didn't move. He simply stood in the spotlight, hands folded, watching them squirm under the weight of the truth. The screen showed their secret meetings, the forged documents, the hidden accounts. Every lie they had told was now laid bare in front of the city's most influential people. When the final clip ended, the lights came back on. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of chairs shifting as people moved away from Zara and Kamau. Jibril didn't need to say a single word. His evidence had spoken for him. Zara tried to step forward, her lips parting as if to explain, but no one wanted to hear her. Kamau reached for his phone, but even that seemed useless now. Their empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing in real time. Jibril gave a polite nod to the audience, thanked them for their attention, and walked off the stage without looking back. He didn't need to see their faces again. He had already won. And in that grand ballroom, with all of Kadora watching, Zara and Kamau's empire of deceit had been reduced to ashes. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. Zara's family, once proud to call her their daughter, sent her away without a word of defense. Kamau's phone wouldn't stop ringing, but it wasn't from friends, it was from clients canceling deals and partners cutting ties. His reputation, once polished and respected, was nothing but dust in the wind. The videos had spread faster than wildfire. Every screen in Kadora seemed to have replayed their laughter, their plotting, their betrayal. Jibril walked through the streets with his hands in his pockets, the early sun warming his face. He felt lighter, not because he had destroyed them, but because he knew they would never again mistake his quiet for weakness. The city that once saw him as calm and harmless now looked at him with a new kind of respect, and maybe a little fear. People moved aside as he passed, some nodding, others whispering. In the cafes and market stalls, the story was already legend. Strangers leaned over their coffee cups, their voices low but excited. He didn't catch them cheating, they said with awe, he caught them plotting. It was a different kind of betrayal, one that cut deeper, and the way he had turned the tables was the kind of tale people loved to tell. Jibril didn't need to join the conversations. He didn't need to explain himself to anyone. The truth had already done the work for him. As he walked past the bakery where he used to meet Kamau, he glanced at the empty table in the corner and kept moving. The game was over, and he had written the final move exactly as he planned.